Hi there, my name is Casey Berman, and I want to welcome you again to another episode of the Octopus Movement podcast, where we dive into the world of the nonlinear with our founding members. And today I'm honored to be speaking with Daniel Hernandez, one of our founding members. Daniel's journey is anything but conventional, and you're going to hear about it today. He's concentrated on, where do I start? Backpacking across the globe, engineering, sustainability, outdoor sports, human-centered design, music, neuroscience, culture, architecture, you name it. There's probably much that I'm missing. So we're going to hear all about that. And right now, his focus is on education. Education as a key lever for improving cultural and social efficiency, which has led to his recent project called Rebel Teaching, where he aims to empower individuals and promote collective action for positive change. Big ideas, a lot on his plate that we are going to hear about. Daniel, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Yeah, thanks so much. Great introduction. I was like, wow, he sounds cool.
I wrote every word myself. So yeah, this guy sounds pretty cool. I'm honored to interview you and be here. So first off, let's kind of kick off. Tell us a bit about yourself. I know you're in Mexico City, but tell us a bit about yourself, and particularly around with Rebel Teaching. This sounds fascinating. What's your focus there?
Yeah, well, I'm Mexican. I grew up here in Mexico, an hour south from Mexico City, smaller city called Cuernavaca. Middle upper class family. To be honest, very privileged. I was able to have very good education and travel, and get very good access. Something that for a while was a bit tricky to own, because you see or you know about Mexico and inequality and all of that. So maybe being too open with that can be tricky. But slowly I've been trying to make the most or the best out of it, and just saying like, hey, I had luck here, so now how can I take all of this and all the opportunities that I've had to give back to people, and find the levers and the medium that are gonna be able to take the opportunities that I was privileged to have and give back to people, which is how I ended up with Rebel Teaching.
It's like when you have things in life, whether they're material or opportunities, there's almost like two choices you can go. You can either wallow in guilt, like why me, or you can go appreciation.
Exactly.
Seems like you went the appreciation. And you may have had your bouts with guilt, but seems like you went the appreciation route.
I'm trying. That's something that I've been trying to work on. Like the guilt is it's so weird to complain about that, but it happens, right? Like we all have our circumstances, and like in for the sake of being 100% vulnerable and honest here, like that's some of the things that I've had to work with and try to make sense of it, to turn it into the most positive thing possible for my life and how I try to live.
And particularly in Mexico, I mean, there's poverty and there's class issues everywhere, of course, in America, definitely. But I mean, you see it so starkly in Mexico, and I'm assuming Mexico City.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Quickly, what's your take on the elections? I know the first woman president potentially. Is that right?
Yeah.
What's the feeling and the vibe there in Mexico City?
There's a little bit of friction for sure, because most people are not super happy with the current government, and the leading candidate is from that same party. So there's a little bit of fear, rejection. Like, if you see her as an individual, she could sound great, but knowing that she's linked to the party and what they have been building or showing as their actions more than their words, you're like, oh, I don't know. So I try to stay positive. To be honest, I'm gonna vote for sure. I'll probably go for the other side just for the sake of democracy, but ultimately I try to think, okay, what can I do regardless of who wins, and what power do I have with my family, my close community, that I can do what I would like for the country, and I try to
lead control. Focus on what you can control.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, talking about what you can control, let's talk a bit about Rebel Teaching. Let me read a little so the audience can see can
Please.
hear about what is. So Rebel Teaching is about helping educators feel empowered by learning not what to think, but rather how to think about innovating every day through their impact with their students. By developing skills like creativity, emotional intelligence, sustainability mindset, and applying the neuroscience of flow states, which I want to ask, through play and dynamic activities, all educators will feel future-proof in their abilities to teach. There's a lot here. I mean, the future-proofing of teachers, flow state. So talk to us a bit about how do you help people, particularly educators, know how to think and not what to think?
Man, I wish that was a simpler question.
Is it a mindset shift that you help with them? Are there
a little
exercises?
bit? Mm-hmm. A little bit. There's a lot of, I try to work with positive psychology, like the culture architecture parts, and like the neuroscience of how can we build and take advantage mostly of creating some self-awareness and growth mindset, I think, are some of the main ones. Realizing that very rarely within education, and even more so now that the world keeps changing every like way smaller time frame than for the past history of human development, we need to be constantly recognizing the feedback and constantly updating our assumptions or the way we think the world works. And this comes from like I said, this self-awareness, this idea of growth mindset. This I love talking about empathy and compassion, firstly with ourselves, like this humility to be like, hey, I don't know everything, but I'm gonna do my best work possible. I love this Maya Angelou quote, do your best until you know better, and once you know better, do better. So that's a little bit like you said, exactly like the mindset of how you come in as an educator into your classroom, into your group of people, that where you can try to do the best for them, but at the same time be open enough to say, hey, this might be true now, but it might not be true later, and I'll try to keep you updated as well. Or and at the same time give you the tools to also make sense of all of this yourself. So it like kind of permeates into the students as well, which is ideally the ultimate impact that I want to do. Like, yes, it's through teachers, but ultimately it's students. And more and more I've been recognizing with, like I said, how the world is changing, that is now not only students like K to 12 or college, but even grown-ups. Like, technology is moving so fast where we need to go back to being students as well if we want to make the most out of how the world is changing and not feel overwhelmed by the crises and challenges that we face. So I've been expanding that idea of education to everyone.
There can be resistance to that because people want to stick with what they know. They don't want to learn over again. They don't want to start from scratch. But I think what you're saying is it's that effort of constant improvement. It's sort of that beginner's mindset, if you will.
Yes.
That's great. No, that's
100%.
Great. And so are these educators in schools in Mexico? Are you doing educators across the world? Who's sort of your ideal client, if you will?
I mean, ideal, coming back to inequality, like I would love to apply as much as this to lower income or people with harder access to the best education possible. Unfortunately, that's hard to get sometimes. And going back a little bit, like, this was not my main career. I transitioned a few years back into education. So I still consider myself very green in this, and still working on connecting with the people who are gonna potentialize a lot of these ideas that I have that I know I also can learn from. So I've been very privileged and fortunate to connect with people also outside of Mexico who are doing great things, and build projects with them, which I know eventually will give enough recognition for my work so that I can sell it or bring it with a little bit more of a backed up force and weights here in Mexico. And also, like, I try to not think just Mexico is the closest one, but the more that you start getting into all these conversations, it's needed really everywhere.
Yeah, I think it's great. No, I think it's fantastic. Now, you've done a lot in your life, energy efficiency, sustainability consultants, outdoor guide, rock climber.
Right.
A lot of people will talk about, what is my life purpose? What is my mission? These all seem sort of disparate and different things that you've done. But is there a common, just personally for you, is there a common theme or sort of thread that you saw in yourself as you did all these different things? Or were these just different muscles you were flexing? I'm curious.
I mean, it's like how they say, like, looking back, the dots connect perfectly, right?
Yeah.
But to be honest, when all of these different stages came in, I was just like going with the flow, going back to that flow keyword, and kind of trusting my intuition. The sustainability consulting, I studied engineering, and that was kind of put in front of me when I was still in the common treadmill of going to school, finding a job, building a career. And I was very lucky that I found that, because I found a job that was having a positive impact, and the company that I ended up in was amazing. My bosses were pretty much my friends, and they were super interested in building me as a consultant, not just with what I already had, but with doing it better. So they helped a lot with personal development and self-growth, and I'm still really good friends with them, and I'm super grateful for how they developed me. Eventually, I realized I never really chose that, and that's when I went backpacking for, I think it was 2 full years, and just finding or searching for. To be honest, at that point, it was a little bit just pleasure. Like, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I just knew I really enjoyed rock climbing and surfing and skiing. So I was like, I'm going to go try to do that for as long as I can.
Right.
And that's how I ended up with the guiding jobs and working the ski towns and trying to find that. But through trying to satisfy those needs for myself, I started recognizing, like, oh, this is awesome. Like, why can more people feel the energy and the pull to feel that? Because through satisfying my needs, now I feel like I want to give back, right? And so I started to try to put all the pieces together. And the education thing comes really from a personal journey within the traditional education system, where you could say I thrived because I was good in school and playing the system. But to be honest, I feel like I left a lot of untapped potential and a lot of parts of me as a human that I didn't develop, that I feel like what I want to build for future students. Like, you would come to where I was, like, way more as a whole human being, connecting all the parts.
During your schooling, your formative years, you feel like you just didn't tap into it fully.
Exactly. Yeah. And not necessarily finding a purpose, but really building yourself into being more intentional with the choices that you make, and feeling this sense of agency and ownership with what you choose.
Now, looking back, do you feel like you didn't reach that potential because you just didn't know it was there and you weren't exposed to it? Or were there blockers and fears that get in your way and you didn't overcome them at the time, but now you're focused on overcoming them? Which maybe a mix of both.
Yeah, for sure. Part of what I try to preach now within education is as much exploration as possible. Like, some people are super lucky to know from their childhood, like, oh, I want to be a pilot, I want to be a doctor, and that's great, but that was not my experience. And I think that's the same for a lot of people, and it can be super overwhelming to be like having to choose a career at 16 or 17 when you haven't explored the world. You don't have now, or me growing up with the internet, I think that was amazing because I had access to a lot of these other different points of view.
Right.
Where if I had grown up 10 years earlier, I wouldn't even have known were possibilities.
Right.
Like like the rock climbing and the surfing and being a guide. Like me from a small city in Mexico, like the culture itself would be very limiting.
Yeah.
Like you're expected to make the football team, become an engineer or a lawyer, or and then get a career, build a family, and that's what life means, right?
What they still expect of you.
You're not exposed to all these other things. So and what I not resent but do try to bring as feedback is that school didn't give me that. I had to look for that, and I had to find it through my curiosities, going online and buying books from that I couldn't get in my local library or in the library in the bookstore, and reading those and having to build that on my own, which for me took longer than I now I look back and I'm still super grateful for the experience that I've had, but I think it could be, like I said, way more intentional, way more streamlined for
now. There are many people your age, or many people who are being born right now, who will have the internet at their disposal, but they may still not be as curious. They may still not want to be as creative. What was it in you and people like you that sort of questioned the beaten path? Because there's so many people nowadays who, even with the internet at their fingertips, they still do the beaten path.
There's an overflow of information, and it ends up being overwhelming and counterproductive, I think. And I think it was luck that when I had access to the internet, a lot of the content was curated. Like it took a lot of effort to put on a website or the earliest stages of blogs. Like people would need to really put effort into what they wanted to say there. So most of the information that you found online was quality, and somehow you could move from one to the other. Now with social media, it's truly a challenge where there's a lot of junk, unfortunately. Like I bring it back to education, and that's another project that I've been working on a lot with, and creating structures to build relationship with technology and being way more intentional, bring this self-awareness of knowing that the information is there, but how can you take ownership of what you're giving your brain? It's the same as food with nutrition. What do you put into your body? What kind of information and videos, blogs, audio, podcasts are you feeding your brain with?
What fears and blockers do you still run into? You know, so many people feel like they're the only one. I can't, other people can make it, I can't make it, or I'm the only one that suffers from this or that. But what are some of the obstacles or blockers or just internal battles that you still fight today, or maybe not fight, but that you still struggle with today?
I was just sharing with Karen before we came into live that I think one of my main traits that I'm an introvert. So I'm the most comfortable on my own in my brain playing with ideas. And I really struggle with putting stuff out there and having to deal with my work being judged. Obviously perfectionism, kind of separating yourself from your work and knowing that your work's not going to be perfect a lot of the time, but it's also what I teach, right? This idea of growth mindset of put it out there, get feedback. So I think that's a constant work. I don't know if it's like selection bias of also the people I work with, but we talk a lot about imposter syndrome, and feeling like there's a lot, like 10 other people, not 10, like maybe hundreds other people who you would say these are better suited for the job. Like why not go to them, right?
What's a way that do you get into your own flow state? I mean, what's a way, sort of a tip of how you overcome that, or at least mitigate it and move forward despite it?
I try to use it and turn it as a positive of being like, hey, like what's the best work I can do that I feel comfortable with, like using this imposter syndrome that I know is at the level of someone maybe that I admire or who I use as inspiration. So sorry. That for sure. And like I said, again, that empathy and compassion with ourselves of being open to showing our growth and showing our work, and being okay with showing stuff that's not super polished, because ultimately that's also where your most authentic self comes in, right? Like if you polish something until it's perfectly smooth and clean, like it loses a little bit of that essence. So yeah, that's a little bit how I try to say.
It's a great point, and you can always couch it as, this is version 1 or it's directional. I think also when you put something out there that's not polished, when you have partners or collaborators, it gives them an opportunity to co-create with you. They actually want it unpolished so that they can sort of add their mix to it.
Yes.
Reid Hoffman, who's the founder of LinkedIn, he famously said that if you are not embarrassed by your first product, you shipped it too late.
Too late. Right? Right.
So that's just part of the process.
Yeah, exactly.
So as you know, this is a group of non-linear thinkers. How do you view non-linear? How do you define that? How do you think about that?
It's, I don't know, I think words are not my strength. I go with feeling, like how you feel it. And I think, or from the conversations that I've had with other non-linear thinkers or Octopus in the group, I think you hear non-linear and it makes perfect sense in your brain. But as soon as you start to put words into it, you start to see it narrowed down, and you're like, yes, this, but it's also this other thing. And
interesting.
So yeah, I would struggle to put into words, but it's unavoidable to feel it. Like you see it and you're like, yeah, that tag makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And words are just symbols when you think about it. So water or agua, that's not H2O. It's a symbol of that liquid thing that we need to drink from time to time. So words are symbols. So it's interesting that there's this feeling you have about non-linearity, if you will, but it's
for sure.
But it's hard to kind of place these words, these symbols around it. Interesting. So where do you see, though, your sort of non-linear powers coming up day to day? How do you sort of, I ask because there's a lot of people watching this who can feel different from the rest of the world, right?
For sure.
They're neurodiverse, they're non-linear, they can't voice their ideas like you just mentioned, or they're around a bunch of non-linear people who may not fully understand their thought process. What are some ways or examples where you've been able to kind of pull on your neurodiversity, your non-linearity, and actually have it come to life in this world, this matrix?
I think it has to do with perspective, and being able to shift perspectives, and sometimes like even entertain two opposite truths in your brain. So it can be and perspectives in time, in reach, in mediums. Like I love this. Do you know Daniel Goleman and the theory of multiple intelligences?
No, tell me. Unpack that.
So Daniel Goleman talks about like multiple intelligences, and I think it's up to 9 now. And it's a theory. It's not like set in stone. It's actually kind of been disproven, but I still find it super useful. And he talks about like the logical, mathematical, the interpersonal, the intrapersonal, the bodily kinesthetic, the naturalist, which is being super connected with nature. And I think non-linears have this different way of communicating through all these different multiple intelligences, when most of the world is like more logical, mathematical sometimes.
Right.
And for an introvert, like there's the extrapersonal, like most of the world is built for extroverts, but the superpowers of the introverts is that you can deconstruct extroversion and use it to your advantage as well. And I don't know, that's something that I worked on to kind of overcome and realize that like this is another skill that I can learn.
What's an example of deconstructing extroversion? That sounds really cool.
I I went a lot into like body language. For example, that I went really into the art of asking the right questions as well, like conversation and dialogue. Language as in itself, and how we use language and how many different ways of language there is. Like I said, you bring it back to the multiple intelligences, and you can communicate through body, through the tone of your voice, like music, like the words you use, and ultimately, like what I ended up with is trying to find a curiosity inside of me about the other when I'm trying to be like extroverted, and finding that curiosity and getting to know the other person. And as an extrovert for others, it's harder to stop talking sometimes, right? But to create a true connection with someone else, like it's through questions and through being truly interested.
That's right.
So yeah, you end up finding that that other side has their strengths as well.
And you know, when you actually listen to someone and pay that attention, on one hand, it could be very strategic in your favor. They could put their foot in their mouth, or they could tell information they shouldn't tell you. You can use against them, or use for a financial gain, right? So there's always that element. But I think also on a less dualistic standpoint, there's that ability to really understand someone, get to know them. They see you're listening. They understand your energy. They see how you're thinking about them in a different way, and that can create even a tighter bond. That's
for sure.
That's fascinating.
For sure.
All right, we're winding down here, Daniel. I could talk to you for hours about this. Quick, kind of fun question. You know, if you could snap your fingers or wave your magic wand and invite anyone into your life, into your reality right now, fictional, non-fictional, alive, from the past, who would you invite in, and why?
I think I'd bring two people.
Yeah.
First, do you know Sir Ken Robinson?
Mm-mm.
I don't know if he's still the most watched TED Talk. He was for a long time, and it's titled "How Schools Kill Creativity." Before his TED Talk, he had this amazing hand-drawn video where he also explains like the problem with education. I remember seeing that when I was probably 13 or 14, and he was the one who got that spark and got the education warm in my brain and it was so cool to see someone older and an accomplished person criticize what I was noticing in my own journey in education, right? So I'm endlessly grateful to him. He unfortunately passed away early in the pandemic, and now I've been working with his daughter and her husband, which is amazing. And I can't imagine what it would be if he was still here, like to have made it there. So yeah, he would be one, and the other person, just to keep it non-linear and go like the complete not opposite, but out of the blue, maybe Rodney Mullen. I don't know if you've ever gotten into skateboarding.
Okay.
He's considered the godfather of skateboarding.
Yeah.
He invented like the ollie, the kick flip, the hill flip, the building blocks of what skateboarding is today. He's responsible for 90% of that.
Was he in the Tony Hawk days? Was he back then?
Yeah, exactly. He and Tony are super good friends. But Rodney is like, he's an outcast amongst outcasts, like usually skateboarders are. And then I remember watching his videos in VHS, and usually you would see, or you would hear punk rock in all the clips. Rodney would come in with classical music. And you're like, yes, that makes perfect sense. Like that's Rodney.
I can't describe it. Like, just makes sense. You feel it.
A bioengineer as well. He's super into like knowledge and the creativity. Like it would be an amazing conversation about creativity with him and Sir Ken.
I love it. And, you know, part of him that I think they're back then, even nowadays, you know, it's not cool to be smart. And particularly if you go into a sort of a rebel type of sport like skateboarding.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a smart kid doing skateboarding, I don't know about you, right? But he embraced it. He was a smart kid. love classical music, but could still shred the skateboard. So that's great.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
We got one more minute left. Daniel, advice, thoughts for our audience that they can take away and benefit from. Do more of this. Don't do this. Focus on this. Free yourself from this. Any other tips or tricks that the audience can take away?
I've been recently thinking a lot about practice, whatever that means to you, and coming back to practice, like what you do every day. Like I feel a lot of the media and like the overall talk is a lot about main events, like, oh, I went to this yoga retreat, or I did this very specific thing.
Right.
But for me, what really makes the difference in how we update or upgrade our lives is in what we do every day, like the small things that you wouldn't notice, like, or you wouldn't put back, but ultimately they keep adding up. So yeah, practice and
just practice the little things that when people aren't watching.
Yes. Yeah. And if you can add to that being really intentional, like then that's a superpower, like being able to show up every day intentional with your practice. Yeah, I would end with that for sure.
And it's a great point, because I think a lot of people sort of, we sort of save up our work, right? Like, well, I'll go work on my side gig this afternoon or the weekend, or I'll do it over Christmas holiday break. Right. I'll get a lot of work done then, or when really it's 5 minutes a day, it's 10 minutes a day. It's just a little
100%. Yeah. Awesome.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much. This was fantastic.
Thank you, Casey. Loved it.
I know you're busy, so really appreciate you taking the time. And everyone in our audience, thank you so much for joining us on the Octopus Movement podcast. Daniel, again, thank you. It was a real pleasure, and I've got some stuff I need to practice now. So awesome. You're inspiring me. But everyone, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us for this episode of the Octopus Movement podcast, where we give you insight into the founding members of the Octopus Movement and give you more insight into neurodiversity, nonlinear thinking, and some of these outcasts that Daniel talked about and how they're thriving in the world. So thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah, we'll see you around the movement. Thank you so much.